You couldn't do that when you started, could you?
No way. No, it was not on the cards at all. I think when I was about maybe 4 months into the program, into the shoulder rehab program, I remember trying to do the one arm passive hang, and yeah, it was like, nah, no way, I'm not willing to try that yet, because that was part of the program throughout all the phases, and it just was not going to happen. So now I can do that. It's not part of my current program, but yeah, it's something I'd definitely be confident doing now for sure.
Yeah, and where were you when you started? Like, talk us through. Take because Yanni doesn't know your story like I do because I'm the one that obviously coaches you. So, what
Sure.
was your what brought you here, and where were you at?
Yeah, so far out, it was nearly 2 years ago to the day, probably just a bit over 2 years ago. I was uh, helping a friend change his car tire because he'd never done it before, and so I was trying to undo one of the lug nuts, and it was super tight, and I just put everything into it, and I felt something go, but I wasn't in pain. But I think this was the catalyst of my problems. And for the 2 weeks after that, I was doing a lot of heavy work overhead, using machinery over my head. And the pain just sort of kind of developed over those 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then, yeah, just got worse until I went to a physio, just a general sports physio. And yeah, they gave me some exercises. I did them for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and nothing was really changing. I was still having lots of pain. It was kind of just getting worse. And then I'd go, right, I'm just going to leave it and not do anything. And it got worse again. And then I got some ultrasounds and x rays, and they came back with bursitis. But my doctor didn't actually tell me that. This was months down the track when I decided to go back to that physio, and she was like, "There's something going on here." And yeah, she looked up my record and found out that I had bursitis, and my GP never told me that, even though it was on the results. So I don't know what that was all about, but anyway, so yeah, I continued doing these exercises. Nothing changed. It got worse, and then eventually, the pain got really bad, and I started to completely lose all my range of motion. And little to my knowledge at the time, that was when I was developing frozen shoulder. And this was around November, October, November 2023, because my son was born mid-November, and that was when it was really getting bad. And throughout Christmas time, and that it was just unbearable. Um, and then I finally got an MRI, and yeah, they showed a slat tear, and I went to a surgeon, and he said straight away, "You've got frozen shoulder." Didn't say much about the slap tear, um, but he suggested a couple of options. One was getting an injection to sort of release the adhesive capsulitis to bring back the range of motion, and if that failed, it was he was talking about getting uh, biceps tendinosis. I can't remember the name of that surgery that you get where you reattach the tendon onto the top of your um, wherever it goes. I can't remember now. It's a wee while ago. And yeah, I was looking at sort of 5.5 grand of surgery if this injection didn't work, and that's when I was just like, no way, I'm not going down that road. And I just started researching like crazy about it, and it's quite hard to find information regarding frozen shoulder. It seemed to be a bit of a grey area at the time, um, in terms of how to cure it. And then that's when I stumbled across you guys on YouTube, and I started doing the first phase that you had on that YouTube video, and I noticed relief like within a week.
Yeah, isn't
It's
that
super, it's super scary, isn't it, when a part of your body just sort of stops working? like
Yeah, and you'd have no idea what's going on.
you
You're
don't
just
know
like,
what's
what?
going on, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I I
because it
can
was so progressive. I was just like, all right, what is happening? Because the pain would it was all around. The pain would move around my whole shoulder blade, down my arm, and then I'd get like this tingling down my armpit, and I was just like, I have no idea what's going on here. This is something else.
The shoulder's a funny joint too, because the nerve, the brachioradial nerve complex that sort of runs from the spine down through the shoulder, even behind the chest and around the back, it's such a diverse sort of number of nerves that it can refer pain all over the place, and you really get bum steered often, because you may have as simple as a subscapularis tear or something wrong with the rotator cuff in the shoulder, but you feel it in your back. You can sometimes feel it down your arm. I had a problem for a while where when I was boxing, where I got inflammation, which compressed on a nerve, and I was getting pain in my tricep. And so whenever I'd go to see someone, I said, I think I've torn my tricep. There's something wrong with my tricep muscle in the back of the arm, because every time I'd throw a punch, it would really hurt. And, you're sort of bum steered, because when you go to a remedial therapist who they will treat that symptom, and I'm getting massage and active release therapies and all these things on my arm, which was just doing nothing. It'd feel good at the time because you're hitting the spot that's hurting. But I later found out that it was to do with an inflammation caused by a subscapularis tear in my shoulder. And
Right.
I was just bum steered for about a year, chasing, ghosts in the arm, just going, why isn't this getting better? But but going back to the feeling that you're describing, when a part of the body, frozen shoulders is really obvious, because it just, your shoulder just stops moving, and over time you just go, what the hell is going on? We actually had a client who developed frozen shoulder after going to the hospital for a completely unrelated surgery. He was getting a hernia fixed, and he came out of that operation and had frozen shoulder. And we're convinced that he was a big guy, about 6'4" or 6'3", quite a heavy guy. I reckon they dropped him in the operating theatre, because they put you out on a gurney, and then they move you onto an operating table, which is a steel bench basically, And I reckon in the process of moving him, they've injured his shoulder. And of course they didn't say anything, but yeah, he came out of, do you remember that, Rad, Bill?
Of course, yeah. Of course.
Yeah. And then we ended up...
I had to train him through that process. Have a look at this though, Yanni, because I found a couple of things here. So this is, and for those of you that are watching, so this was Tim's range of motion on the 26th of January in 2024. And then
you can even see that you're rotating your torso to be able to lift your shoulder.
Yeah.
Because
you couldn't even. So the true range, if your shoulders were facing towards the camera, your hand would have been way further towards the camera, and the face says it all as well. Look at how happy you are with that range of motion.
You even got a tan from the program.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's right. And have a look at this for somebody that couldn't do pull-ups and that came with a frozen shoulder. I've got him doing pause rep chest to bar pull-ups now with a controlled eccentric, and good scapular control. I mean, it's just
try and ignore the sweaty crack.
Mate, if you're not training in your if you're not training in your grundies in the garage, you haven't lived.
It's not true home training.
I put them on for the videos. Normally,
it's great.
Normally, it's just all kid out. Yeah,
love it.
No, look, that's unreal, Tim. And I mean that place of like fear and concern. So many people can relate to it, because unfortunately, this is actually a concept that I find myself explaining to people more and more and more, is that when you go to an expert, like a doctor and a physio, the majority of them are relying on what I call declarative knowledge, which is the knowledge that comes from learning about something. So when you go to university, you study something, when you work with specialists and you read, you have a very high level of declarative knowledge, but that's very different to procedural knowledge, because procedural knowledge only comes from doing something and from having experienced a result. So a doctor and a physiotherapist has a level of declarative knowledge that exceeds Yanni and mine by far. They've gone to university and studied this stuff, but we have procedural knowledge that, unless a physio or a doctor has not only had a slap tear and bursitis, fluid in the bursa themselves, and rehabilitated it successfully, then their procedural knowledge is not even in the same hemisphere as what Yanni's and mine is. And it's very, very different because as you've experienced, I'd argue that physio that you went and saw had a high level of declarative knowledge, but no procedural knowledge. And so they've given you exercises that are the textbook way that you fix the injury that you had, but you had very little success. Us, on the other hand, we've lived through it. We know what works, and the stuff that we give people, it has a really quick result. So, to go from that place of nothing's working, I've tried this, I've watched that video, I've gone to that doctor, I've gone to that surgeon, and then finally see some progress. It's game changing, isn't it? And talk us through. So you've talked us through where you were at when you started.
Before we progress, wait a second, because I want to drill into the fact that you opted not to do the surgery that the surgeon was offering you. On the one hand, it's I believe super lucky because we, like, I even have this mindset. I've had surgery a couple of times on different areas of my body, the knee, the ankle, and they were all based after a pretty catastrophic accident, mountain bike injury for the ankle, and then knee reconstruction from a footy injury. But the interesting thing is, like, for me, when I was sitting in front of a surgeon, and I went to see a number of surgeons to get different feedback and advice, the ankle was like I didn't have an option because I was opened up. I'd severed right through the shin, and there was bone and all sorts of stuff visible. So you have to fix it. But the knee was optional. It was elective surgery, and I had this sort of idea in my mind after consulting with a number of people that I believed were experts that, and arguably are, that it was just going to solve the problem. The surgery it's expensive, but it's guaranteed to fix the problem. And here I am. The surgery happened in 2013, so we're we're all 10 years, 11 years past it now. And I'm still having problems with my knee, and so I think there's a really important message out there for a lot of people to really understand. And Rad and I preach this a lot, but you've somehow made this choice. I don't know whether it was an informed decision or whether it was just cost bias, but you chose not to do the surgery. Why is that? Other than the cost, if we put the cost aside, were you just red flagged at the idea of getting cut open? Was that something that you have a dogmatic belief about, or a preconceived belief about? Someone who's had a bad experience?
I do, yep. It's a few things. I mean, cost was obviously a major one. My dad has actually had a lot of trouble with his shoulder. He's had reverse shoulder surgery about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and he got an infection. And that's been a massive scare for him and our family. He got really, really sick last year. But yeah, before that, he'd had a couple of surgeries on the shoulder and just wasn't really coming right. And then for the longest time, he had this infection and he was really unwell. So I just saw his shoulder's been a problem for a long time since he was he was a builder by trade, so he had a lot of troubles with it from an early point in his life. So yeah, I just didn't see a real positive outcome, So, and I guess I'd seen your video, Rad, and I just saw a better solution, and I thought, well, if I'm getting surgery, I'm going to have to go through this rehab anyway. So why not try the rehab first and then decide?
That's literally the misconception that everyone makes a mistake on. And this is, I think, something that is so important. I'm super glad you said it. The surgery, in my experience and from the plethora of different people that I've spoken to, it only works if you get the rehab right. And generally the rehab is done right if you have a prior history of exercising. So when you see athletes, and so I sort of based my interpretation of surgery off watching an athlete who does an ACL. In my case, I did my ACL, MCL, and my meniscus was torn in the process when my knee was sort of partially dislocated. And I've seen lots of athletes that I aspire to go through a similar or the same sort of injury, and then they go and get a reconstruction and they're out on the footy field again in a year. But what people don't understand is that they are at elite fitness level prior to the injury, prior to the surgery, and they have the best experts working with them from day dot all the way through their rehab afterwards. So they're used to exercising at a really high level. They've got a great foundation and they get it right after the surgery. But we all sort of think, that's what it's going to be like for me. And the reality is, I don't know this. I don't know the statistics exactly. Rad, you might know better than me, but I'm pretty sure it's like more than 60% of surgeries don't work. They don't fix the problem. Or orthopedic surgery.
In slap tears only, I know the statistics, and I know it from Nilesh, who is a friend of ours, who's a world-class physiotherapist. He's the guy I was telling you about, Tim, who is he's now the head physiotherapist for the Newcastle Knights, which for those of you around the world watching, it's the second highest code of football in Australia. In Australia, we have Australian Football League and we have the National Rugby League, and they're both the highest level athletes that the country produces. So to be a physio at that level, you are one of the best of the best. And when I asked him about surgery for a slap tear, Yanni and I were really fortunate. This is for anybody listening that wants to know why do we get such great results with this shoulder rehab. This is largely the reason why. When I did the second slap tear that I had, so I've had one in both shoulders. Nilesh was on hiatus from his career as the physio for the Newcastle Knights because it was during the second lockdown in COVID in Australia, and they were forced to either become in a football bubble, which means that they have to move away from their family and live in hotels where they're only exposed to people that are playing in the football league, so the coaches, the physios, and the players. And Nilesh opted not to do that. He had a newborn child. He didn't want to be a part of that. And so he said, hey, can I come and work in the gym in your clinic, and I'll just do, work with general population. And he was there for a year. So I was working with him for a year. And so I know that's a bit of a bum steer answer, but Yanni, he told me when I asked him about surgery for slap tears, he said in 60% of cases, symptoms don't improve after surgery for a slap tear. And then before we continue with you, Tim, this is something that I wanted to say, which I found really interesting. One of our members, Pavel, or in English is Paul.
Yeah, I've just looked in the calendar. We're interviewing him at 3 o'clock.
We're interviewing him at 3 o'clock.
So we can ask him
again.
this question.
We're going to ask him again, but I've already interviewed him, and you can go and have a look at this interview on YouTube, where if you look for the thumbnail, there's an image of Pavel and there's an image of a spine that's really twisted. He's a spine surgeon. So
he's an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in spine.
That's right. But that's all he does. All he does every day when he goes to work is surgeries on spines. And he's got over 20 years experience. So he is what you would call an absolute expert when it comes to surgery. And when I asked him about doing structural balance training and doing what you've done, Tim, for your injury versus going and getting surgery, he, without even stopping and thinking about it, he said every single person, no matter what the pain or the spine symptoms are, should absolutely do structural balance training first, get the best result that they can, and if they can't improve, then they consider surgery. And the only time that you wouldn't do that, in his words, was if you have nerve damage. Nerve damage exercise won't fix, and surgery, you do need to consider surgical intervention. But to go further than that, what he said was, the problem with when people go down the route of surgery is that they see it as the end result, that I'm going to get surgery and it fixes everything, and it doesn't. When you go down the route of surgery, often you're getting mechanical parts put in your body, like they're using bolts and they're using things to reattach tendons to bones, and those things don't repair on their own. It becomes like a car where you need maintenance on it from a mechanic. And so years down the road, you need surgery again because it's not something that fixes it.
And not to mention the risks of infection. I mean, it's just been a real worry for my dad and our family. Like I mentioned, like he got really, really sick last year. Thankfully, he's off antibiotics now, but that's a huge risk involved with it.
Yeah, that's the other thing that we don't really talk about, which is whether, irrespective of whether the surgery is successful or not, there are all sorts of other risks that come with going under the knife, And Rad, I was just thinking we should get Patrick Offner on the podcast because he's an orthopedic surgeon that does knees and shoulders and things
he's a
like
trauma
that.
surgeon.
Oh, he is. That's
He's
right.
He's a trauma surgeon. But nonetheless, I mean,
we seem to have a lot of clients in the UMS.
We've got surgeons and doctors. We're interviewing Marin in a couple of weeks, who you know who Marin is, Tim, because you see her posting all the time. Who's a GP in Germany, Yanni, and she's rehabilitated her frozen shoulder recently as well. So that'll be a good one to do. But let's move on. Cool. Right, so we've established where you were when you started, and you weren't getting any results from the physio. You tried the free routine that we had on YouTube, and you started to see some positive results. What caused you to join the UMS?
I can't really. I mean, I was just convinced that the program was going to, get me back to normal again. I mean, I'd had relief after probably a week. I started to notice a difference of doing that first month, and then I wanted to keep going down that road because I think you mentioned something about, if you don't keep progressing through it, it's, the pain's just going to come back. And whenever I did stop, the pain did come back and get worse. So I didn't want to stop at that point.
Yeah, I have to ask just very quickly, because you said before that you got given a bunch of exercises from the physio and you did them for about a month and it didn't really change anything. In fact, you were sort of declining maybe still in pain symptoms. And you just mentioned that you did our free routine on YouTube and you felt like it was improving. Is that true?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. Sorry, free plug out there for our free stuff online. Don't go to the physio. No, I'm joking. I actually am not going to sit here and say poo-poo physios and surgeons, because in the right context, it's really important to go and get diagnosis from a good physio. But what Rad mentioned before is something that we should just quickly mention before we proceed. There's a vast difference between a physio who's got a bit of skin in the game, like the guys that we work with, Phil, Nilesh, Leroy, and a general pops physio who doesn't exercise themselves, because they just can't really relate to the concept of, I think one thing that fundamentally lacks with physiotherapy in general populations is progressive overload. They don't really understand how to get you from that very first instance to beyond where you were before by progressively overloading the exercises and the programming. But there is a time and a place for physio and surgery, and we shouldn't just poo-poo them. Continue, Rad. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure that they've had a lot of success in other areas, but I felt like it was kind of, here's a sheet of exercises to do a few times a week and see how that goes. And then it kind of ends there. It's like there wasn't a long-term program solution because they didn't have the right diagnosis from the start. They had some diagnosis, but there was obviously something else going on as well. So I guess I would say is just make sure you do the research yourself. If you notice any problem, like, you've got to dig into it and not delay it and just think it'll go away.
I'm going to say something hugely controversial here, and Rad, you can either tell me that I'm silly or back me up. But believe it or not, having the right diagnosis generally only limits what you should be doing. Like, for instance, a certain diagnosis will take a few movements off the table in the prescription. But generally, as a general rule of thumb, it doesn't really matter what the injury is. If you apply the right type of structural balance training, it'll fix almost anything. It's right. Something that I learned to give you a perfect example, Rad and I suffered vastly different shoulder injuries. Mine, from the mechanism, was that I was doing a backward somersault. You jump onto a wall, do a step up the wall, and do a backward somersault. It's the trick they used to do in the movies all the time, the kung fu movies. I was literally doing that on the dance floor of a nightclub, and I did it once, worked really well. Then I got a little bit boozy later on, and I was trying to hook up with this chick, and she said, "Man, do that move you did before," and I was like, "Oh yeah." And I did it, and I didn't notice that there was a bulkhead above me. that my feet hit when I did the backward somersault. So it slowed my rotation down, and I ended up having to put my hand down to stop myself landing on my head, and it subluxed my shoulder and sort of dislocated my shoulder. So anyway, long story short, caused a very similar, my shoulder was stuffed. I couldn't lift my shoulder above my head. The
And
whole
you didn't
thing
get a
was
wife out of it.
dysfunction. Didn't get a wife out of it either. Yeah. And, and I went to a physio who ended up introducing us to all of the guys that we speak about. This guy's name is Leroy. He's an amazing physio. He gave me a set of exercises, fixed a whole bunch of stuff. He does some really wild visceral manipulation therapy. And my shoulder was fixed. And I'd seen 3 or 4 surgeons before that, and they all said I needed a shoulder reconstruction. It was destroyed, And then years later, Rad had problems with his shoulders, went and saw the same guy, and he gave him the exact same exercises, despite the fact that the symptom, what do you call it? The actual injury, the mechanism of injury, and the injury itself was very different. Rad and I both healed our shoulders with the same series of exercises, and that's when it clicked to me. Like, there's a basic mechanics, and I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. That was my old life before I got into personal training, so I understand the logic behind it. But you've got, a certain mechanical system and structure that at optimal level is very resilient and robust. And when it's compromised through muscular imbalances, and which can lead to worse things, bone, imbalance, which we call postural imbalance or a postural issue, when a muscle is super tight on one side and really weak on the other, the shoulder can rotate forward and you get internal rotation and kyphosis, whatever, rounded shoulders. But when the system is operating at the right level, everything sort of falls into place and the body heals itself. When the system is not operating correctly due to these structural imbalances, everything falls apart. You get excessive joint glide. You start to aggravate structures around the bones. You get inflammation. You get bursitis. You get a breakdown sometimes of the tissues themselves, which end up resulting in muscle tears, tendon tears, and complete sort of failure of the system and structure. And what that usually leads to is this frozen shoulder syndrome. The body just goes, oh, this is fucking too much. I need to just lock it down so we stop hurting it, And so, it feels good to know your exact problem. Like when you go get an MRI and they name all these beautiful Latin terms and tell you exactly what's going on, and you think, okay, I need this very specific exercise to fix that problem. It actually doesn't work that way. 9 times out of 10, the diagnosis will just say, okay, well, you've got a tear of this muscle. So logically, we don't want to stretch that muscle because we're going to just open that tear and slow the healing process down. And we have a structure here that's deformed slightly, or there's fluid there or whatever. We need to make sure that we don't aggravate that more. And that's really all Rad and I do. We just it's more about removing certain exercises that we would later give when the shoulder settles down or those tissues have remodeled and healed again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's not a perspective I would have thought of at all, and it's not something that you hear a lot of people talking about.
No, it's not. Everybody thinks that there's like a magic silver bullet exercise that they need that's specific for their shoulder or for their injury, but it doesn't work that way.
Need or want. I think we want it because it's like fundamentally hardwired in our brain that we don't want to have to exert too many calories, too much of our brain energy to fix this problem. We want to do it with the minimal amount of effort as possible because, frankly, we got a shitload of else to worry about in our life. You just said that you've got a new child that would be taking up a lot of your brain energy to keep alive, you just naturally we want to use as little energy, as little calories as possible to solve the problem. And so it's in our better interest to find that silver bullet exercise. The unfortunate reality is, and this goes right back to what we were saying at the start as to why most surgeries don't work, because people don't put the work in and around the surgery. They don't put the work in prior to prepare the body, and they don't put the work in after to rehab the body. And then what Rad was mentioning before with Pavel's comment it's like you need maintenance going forward after you've had that surgery. It's not just going to be totally okay anymore, you know. And I see these so many comments that Rad has to answer on YouTube with people saying, so if I do this, do I have to do it forever? Like, do I have to keep exercising, or can I just do this for a month or 2 months and then my problem is solved? And the unfortunate reality is that the body's either constantly evolving or it's degenerating, like it's kind of growing or dying, you know. And age tends to tug pretty heavily on the latter. And if we want to remain resilient, robust, and healthy, then we have to continually maintain our bodies. You know, that's just the way it works. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
what results have you noticed, Tim, since you started with us? Talk us through what's happened for you. What was the process like? You know, with when you started, you'd had that little win, you felt a little bit of improvement, and then you came into the UMS. How did it all work out for you?
Yeah, it sort of progressively, like it was very slow because of the frozen shoulder. Like you say, there's nothing you can really do about that. Like it's going to run its course. But you know, the light, you know, so I was doing super light weights at the start. You know, getting pretty bloody humbled. But it took the pain away at night. You know, not having night pain was a really big win. And I just accepted the frozen shoulder, and it's going to hurt if I, you know, move the wrong way or try and reach, you know, backwards or whatever. But just having some kind of pain relief at night, and gradually the day-to-day pain got better. I did actually get a saline injection in my shoulder, and that would have been maybe a month into the program. Um, uh, but that was more to free up range of motion, and what they said it would do wasn't quite the result I got from that. Like it freed up a little bit, but not really a lot. I think because I'd lost a lot of muscle function on the inner muscle system, they weren't working as you informed me in the program. So yeah, the injection helped a little bit, but yeah, it definitely didn't meet the expectations. And so I just committed with the program. I was like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just going to do UMS. And gradually it just got better. And you shared that photo before of my progress photo. I should mention that latest photo when I've got my arm up here. I was able to do that. I just haven't updated that photo for like months. I was able to do that last year. So that, you know, I've been able to do this since probably, I don't know, September, October. So the progress was a lot faster than the dates that you see there. Um, yeah, and it's just been maintenance really since then. You know, transitioning into the full UMS program, um, I've now been able to actually develop strength and build muscle. And like before that, I would just, you know, before I knew about you guys, I was just doing my own workouts at home with no real direction. I was just working out and doing exercise because you should, you know, not with any direction at all. So, and not really seeing any results because I didn't know what I was doing. So, you know, the positive, the other positive thing that's come out of this is not only has my shoulder gotten so much better, I'm actually more informed about how to work out, and I'm way more disciplined. Like you started me, Rad, on 6 workouts a week. I requested 5, but you put 6, and I'm glad you did. I was like, all right, I'm gonna just throw the sink at this and just commit no matter what. Like I was in the garage at 8 o'clock every night after everyone had gone to bed, just grinding in my jocks. And yeah, I just thought it's either give it everything or forget about it, And the positive thing was that it allowed me to develop the discipline to keep working out, and now it's become a real thing that I just have to do in life is working out. It gives me a lot of confidence and just makes my life better, really.
Oh man, I love that, and I want to touch on that because Tim, there are several ingredients that, or there are several factors that we see consistently in people that get really good results with the UMS, and one of them is people that do it exactly like you described, is people that really go for it, and it that doesn't mean balls to the wall workouts, sweating and, hitting PBs every week, does it? Like, that's not what you were doing, and it's not what I was guiding you on. It's just about creating that consistency and building this habit around it. And I regularly, when we get new members, talk them through the idea of where they'll say, look, I want to do this alongside what I'm doing. And I try to explain to them, I say, you can do that if that's what you want to do. And I'll write whatever program you want, but you won't get nearly as good a result as if you tell me exactly how many days a week you're going to work out and I completely program all of it. Because only then am I looking at the whole thing and being able to say, okay, this is going to work well. The recovery is not going to interfere with it. And it's when people have this idea of, I'm going to do the UMS just to help with this issue, but I'm going to do the rest of my training over here. And my Kung Fu teacher he said something to me once. I mean, we're going back 27 years here. I'd only just started with this new teacher, but I'd already been training with a couple of other teachers for several years. So I thought I knew a lot, and I was constantly questioning what my teacher was saying to me. And one day he pulled me aside, and he was your classic, what you imagine a Kung Fu teacher to be like Pak Mei from Kill Bill, the teacher that just stands there and says very little, but when he says something, it's very impactful. And he pulled me aside once and he said, Rad, as a student, it's not your job to question everything that your teacher teaches you. Your job is to choose the teacher that you trust and then follow exactly what your teacher tells you to do for at least 6 months, and then decide whether the results that you're getting are what you want, and then whether you want to continue with this teacher or find a new teacher. But he said, it was a really profound thing that he said to me. If you go to a new teacher and you just question everything that they do all the time, you'll never get the underlying lessons. And a teacher doesn't teach you in a way where they're thinking, what is this person going to get out of this one session? A teacher teaches you in a way where they think, how am I going to get this person to this level in 6 months? These are the steps that I'm going to take. And if you question every one of the steps, you never see how the process rolls out for you. And so the fact that you did that is one of the reasons why you got such good results. And I'm saying this even for people that are listening that aren't even going to join the UMS. If you're working with a coach, do what the coach tells you to do. Really believe it, because you can look at the results that you got from it.
Yeah, and I think being a teacher myself of music and guitar, like what you said is, I've really sort of stuck by that too. It was like you said, trust the process. You're not going to see a result on the day that you do that exercise. It's like it's the consistency of always coming back to it each day, or whatever your program has laid out. And I just thought, okay, just be patient, trust the process, and I've applied that to my work as well, which has been great. Because it does take time, and you have to be able to trust your teacher.
Yeah, 100%. And what you've done for yourself, it cannot be overstated as to how powerful it is, because what you've created in your life, Tim, is the habit of exercise. Like, it's become a habit for you, not something that's like optional that you have to think about, that's hard to do. Like, you've integrated it into your life, and that's something that we all really should be doing. We all should be exercising to some degree in a habitual state, not in a whether we've got time or not state. Because, if you can exercise when things are hard, when you've got an injury, when you don't really want to, when you're doing these exercises that sort of seem dicky, that you feel like, oh man, this is really humbling. And if you can get through that and then get to the state where you're at now, where you're doing really cool stuff, where you're getting better at pull-ups and you're building muscle and you're doing stuff, then it becomes really easy when you're doing the cool stuff, So
it's actually interesting, because I believe, or at least in my experience, everyone who have noteworthy physiques or noteworthy athletic capabilities started from a place of compromise, from injury. They had a real need to overcome something, pain. For me, it was my back. I had a horse riding accident that really started me on the exercise path of like lifting weights and actually wanting to develop strength. I'd done boxing and I played rugby league and I played soccer, but I'd never been in a gym, lifting just to lift weights. And that started because of my back pain. Rad had a similar experience, and and most of my friends that I know that are either really successful in even bodybuilding and powerlifting and CrossFit, and they all came from a place of compromise where they had to start. They had no choice. It was either accept that they were just going to completely be, a compromised, limited human, or fix the problem. And then decades down the track, it's an enormous part of their lifestyle now. And you mentioned before that you've got a young family. I can't stress to you the significance of the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree with your children. And exercise is such a fundamental part of health. Health, if you look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, it says to be absent of injury or illness. That's what health means, injury or illness. And you can't not become injured and compromised if you're not strong and resilient and flexible, And so I think it's such an important part of this whole process. It's funny, I've just been back and forth with a member who was cancelling his membership because he's really sort of lacking a little bit of motivation and has thought, he's been with us for years. I looked at his history and he's been with us for like 2 years. This is Reza, Rad. I just CC'd you in his email. And I said, why are you cancelling? And he said, because I'm just struggling with motivation and I think I need to go and work with someone face-to-face in the gym for a little while. And it's funny because we interviewed a guy called Tommy a couple of weeks ago who has had the complete opposite. He's come to us after being with a face-to-face trainer for 2 years and he just didn't get any result. And he described
and he wasn't motivated.
Well, this is the point. He described this process of, he realized that he was lacking this fundamental drive to work out, and he would only do the stuff that the face-to-face trainer was walking him through and holding his hand through. But he was only seeing the guy 2 days a week, and it wasn't really enough to get the result he wanted. And the guy was programming other days, but he just wouldn't do them. And then since joining UMS and doing it with us, he's got a far better result. He's put on 6 kilos of lean muscle and really, really moving towards his goals. And I said, what's different? And he said, it's really interesting. The UMS taught me to be self-motivated. Whereas when I was paying this guy 10 times the amount to come to my house and walk me through the workouts, I never actually achieved anything. And I tried to explain this to the member of ours who's sort of struggling. And I said, we've got to figure out how to get self-motivated, because if you go and pay someone else to motivate you, it's a learned skill. It's something that you have to cultivate. You have to exercise. It's just like your muscles. They won't get stronger. Motivation and drive won't get stronger unless you exercise it. And if you pay someone else to give it to you, it'll never happen for you, And it's really interesting. But, it's great to hear that you're at that level now. But I tell you, this is only the beginning for you, because what you'll start to find, and at least this is what happened to me, and I know it happened to Rad, is that showing up for my kids, I've got 2 young boys, 10 and 7, has become one of my motivating factors, my most strong motivating factor now. I'm also the coach of both their soccer teams, and all their kids sort of look up to me. And I had this moment the other day. My oldest son is in a junior development league now. We've gone from just social soccer and we just crushed the league. So we've been promoted right up and we're in Division 2 now, junior development. And I was warming the kids up, and part of our warm up is part of what we do in the UMS. We do Cossack squats, we do the low hip rotation, we do ostrich walks, and we do our squat routine during the warm up of their football team. And I made a comment to the 12 kids, I said, God, guys, I'm almost 50 years old and I've got a better squat than you guys do. Like, I'm more flexible than you guys. And the entire team was like, what? How old are you? And I said, I'm 45. I'm turning 46 soon. And they were like, no way. I thought you were like mid-30s or something like that. You're so much fitter and leaner than my parents, and they're in their 30s, And I was like, yeah. And my kids really... you can tell that they're proud of their dad for that, like they look up to me in that regard, and they're exercising now. I've just got a whole delivery from Everlast for their boxing. They want to learn boxing because I was a boxer. So we've got a punching bag now going in their room and all this sort of stuff. And they've asked me to start selling their toys because they want me to buy gym equipment. You know, they want to be working out. And I've got them doing a routine, but it's all body weight. But now they want dumbbells and they want equipment. And, you know, this is a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. So I'm telling you right now, the more you embrace this concept of, oh, this is a part of my life now, this is my identity, I'm going to be a fit, strong, healthy human being to show up to my children, it will really affect them in a positive way. I guarantee it, you know.
And that has been one of the motivating factors. I mean, I've got 2 boys as well, 3 and 1, and yeah, I want to be able to do the things that they want to do when they're, you know, old enough to, whatever it is they want to do. You know, if we want to be going hiking or fishing or whatever it is, you know, I want to have the fitness and the strength to be able to do whatever they want to do, and I want to inspire them to want to do that stuff as well. I don't want to be restricted, and I don't want to get home from work and watch TV and drink beer. You know, like, done years of that, and it's not conducive to, you know, good results.
Yeah,
man,
100%.
isn't that, you know, I relate to that so much. Yanni and I both, in our younger years, we did so much of drugs and alcohol. And I've told people that when I go out, no, I'm not drinking, or I don't drink that much anymore. And I've had people say, oh, but that's not really living. Like, you know, you should be able to have a beer here and there. And I find that such an interesting concept, because I think, well, I've actually done that, and I've taken that to the extreme. Like, I really know what drugs and alcohol has to offer me. I ain't missing out on anything by not doing it. But people that haven't tried not drinking and not taking drugs for a decent period of time, I'd say at least 90 days, you know, without any blowouts, and push their fitness
and work on themselves
work on improvement, like what you've been doing. There's an element to life that they've never experienced before, and the older I get, the more that's what I want, you know.
Same here. And I don't whatever people want to do, that's what they want to do, and sometimes a lot of people are fine with that, and that's totally cool, but it's not for me anymore, you know. I
had a great experience recently. I've introduced my boys to snowboarding. It's something that I'm super passionate about and that I enjoy. And we did our first big trip. We've done a couple of trips to Europe. We've done a trip to Europe, but they were very young, and only my eldest got to ski. This time we went to Japan, and I took them like properly snowboarding. I paid for personal trainer to teach them and everything. And I just realized, like, I was shredding, and as good as I've ever been at boarding, and considering the injuries that I've had that would, you know, in most cases put people on their ass for the rest of their life, I just thought, wow, like, there's no way that I could be up here on the mountain shredding for several days, for 5-6 days in a row, with the kids at my age, if I wasn't as strong as I am and as flexible as I am, you know, like, it just wouldn't be possible. And awesome. I was super stoked. I was a little bit concerned with how my knee would go, because it is problematic and a bit temperamental, but it was totally fine. And I thought, wow, like, I'm so glad I've invested this time into my body, in the decades prior, so that I can be in this situation right now where my kids can make this like an annual thing where we go and shred the mountains. I'm going to bring them to New Zealand. Sounds like you've got a bit of a Kiwi accent there. Yeah? Whereabouts are you from in New Zealand?
Wanaka.
Well, stop it. You know, before we opened the gym, I almost bought a house in Wanaka, right by the lake. Yeah. Yeah, I had a bit of cash, and I did a camper van trip around the South Island, just sussing it out. Of course, ended up in Queenstown. I had a friend who was a helicopter pilot in Franz Josef, and he took us for a wicked helicopter ride. I fell in love with Wanaka, mate. That area, that lakes area down there, is just so beautiful. It's incredible.
Yeah. No, we were born and bred down there before social media and the world knew about it. It was just a quiet
mate.
What happens?
When I was looking, mate. this is when was it? I think it was 2008, 2009. Yeah, about 2008, 2009. And I was looking at this beautiful house in Wanaka for like just over $200,000, like little house, not a big house. It was only a little 3-bedroom thing, but yeah, I think it was about $230,000 on the market. And
Wow.
yeah, now it's
Probably
like Sydney
2.3
prices
million
now.
now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Tim,
I'm
I've got a question I want to ask you because coming to the end now of our time. There's a lot of people out there that are going to relate to where you were when you first started, and that is you've just got this pain. It's moving around. You're getting conflicting advice. You're seeing a doctor says this, a surgeon says that, a physio. You try physio, none of it's working. You go on YouTube and there's 10, 20, 100 self-proclaimed gurus that are all telling you different stuff, and you come across Unity Gym, a couple of guys that are saying that they've lived through it themselves. What would you say to that person that's sitting there wondering whether this is really all it's cracked up to be, or is it just snake oil?
Oh, just hands down, just do it. Like it might not be face to face, but it works. Like I wouldn't question it. I think a lot of what sold me as well was how detailed you were about everything, and we talked about this recently when I saw you. You're obsessed with optimizing everything and just being well informed about the process, and I really liked that. That was a selling point for me. Yeah, I just wouldn't question it, really. It's been a really positive thing for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks so much, mate. Look, it's we've been here for an hour now, so we'll wrap it up because we have to get back to do our stuff. But thank you so much for your time, Tim. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
No, thank you guys. No, and thanks for everything. It's been awesome.